We're talking now about identity group rights. Identity group rights. What's an identity group? Identity group is any group of people that identify with one another by virtue of certain characteristics that they have in common or say that they have in common. There are many, many identity groups in society. We finished talking about natural rights. Those are the rights that all human beings have had throughout all time, everywhere on the earth. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We talked about social and economic rights, which are rights that human beings have claimed that they have as of the 20th century. So about 100 years. The second tier rights, the social and economic rights that human beings claim to have. Now we're talking about identity group rights, which really have the substance of their claim is within in the past few years, particularly in the United States, but not just in the United States. Other parts of the world as well are getting into this whole identity group rights kind of thing. So these rights are based upon the collective interest. That means the interest of people that are members of these various groups, these identity groups, specific groups, often minority groups, but not always ethnically minority. Could be sexual preference minority or gender-based. I really don't know the difference between sex and gender. And it seems to me they're the same thing, but who knows? I guess with the left's redefinition of common words over these past 4 or 5 years, the world is kind of on its head. And so I guess I can say there could be gender groups and there could also be sex groups, sex-based groups. In any case, any group that considers itself different from the rest of the world. And maybe in the past, historically, they've seen themselves pushed to the periphery of society on the outside. And so they consider that they have a historical bias against them or a systemic ism against them, whether that's racism or sexism or genderism or, whatever the ism happens to be. That's where we get into the rights of indigenous people, people that have lived in a land before, people have moved onto that land and either conquered that land or assimilated into the culture that was there or dominated after a clash of those cultures. However they came to be in that land, we assume that those who have been there the longest, they're an identity group that has been marginalized by the new group, and therefore they need extra attention. Linguistic minorities, women and equality, freedom from discrimination, LGBTQ plus, right? That's up to, 70 or 100, 200 different gender preferences that are now part of that ridiculous LGBTQ group. I don't want to say ridiculous yet. I do think it's ridiculous, but I don't want to alienate anybody at the beginning of this video. Key characteristics is that, once again, they focus on the collective needs and characteristics of that particular group that is unified by those particular characteristics. And the purpose of the group identity is to say it's us against them. It's Citadel mentality that says all of them have been either historically or systemically oppressing us for a period of time. Right? Males have been oppressing women. Right? Blacks have been oppressed by whites. Right? Gays and lesbians have been oppressed by straight. Right? That kind of stuff. So, can be controversial with debates about potential conflicts with individual rights and principle of equality. In other words, the whole idea of identity groups and rights that should be recognized by all of the world to support and recognize and respect as they would have it be respected within the identity group. In other words, they're the final arbiter. They themselves are the final arbiter as to whether they've been given the appropriate respect from the rest of the world. That's as against natural rights. Natural rights is the ability of people to choose, to worship, to think, to say, to do anything that they want to do, as long as it's not infringing upon the rights of others in a manner that we would consider criminal and something actionable in court. For identity group rights, it's different. It's all about getting people to bow or bend their knee to members of the identity group. So we have several different identity groups that are identified in society, and that number of identity groups is constantly growing and expanding. There are so many identity groups in America right now that it's kind of difficult to identify a single unifying factor among these identity groups, although these identity groups themselves will often identify with other identity groups in order to unify, to gain some power as against the mass of the people. Do these identity groups have to add up to a majority in order to have impact on society? Absolutely not. There's something called critical mass, and that is when you get a high enough proportion, and that proportion may be only 2%. Maybe it's 12%. When you have a high enough proportion of the larger group in order to influence the other group or the rest of the group, that critical mass can have its way. Now, how is that possible? Well, there's a guy named Mancur Olson, and I used to read a lot of Mancur Olson's books, and he's pretty good. Power and Prosperity, that kind of stuff. The Wealth of Nations, I don't know if he talked about that. He talked about it. I don't think that was the name of his other book or first book that I read about it from him. But he wrote about these things. He said for most of us, we don't really care what happens. And think of it, it's the same for you and for me. If somebody really wants something in their lives, it's okay with me. It doesn't affect me. It's not going to cost me anything. Sure, I want to maintain that relationship, and so I'll go ahead and support that inclination, at least until I learn otherwise, right? Most of the world is like that. When there's a critical mass, there's a group that wants to change the default in some way, that they can get most of the population to go along with them without thinking. That's what mass psychosis is all about, isn't it? That's what bandwagon is all about, that whole fallacy. It's a reality. People act without thinking simply because there's someone that really cares about that particular result. So we're going to support them, whether we know why we're supporting them or not. Well, that's pretty much a key to identity group rights. Identity group rights imposes upon the rest of the population a requirement that the rest of the population respect that identity group in significant and meaningful ways. That they not impose their way upon them, that they hire those people, for instance, whether those people look like goofs. It's not about merit. It's about identity groups trying to rectify systemic and historic oppression that they've experienced. So identity groups rights kind of fly in the face of natural rights. They're not exactly completely compatible with social and economic rights either. They're about the individuals that are members of these groups. In fact, it's all about identity group rights, not about individual rights, but identity group rights. There's a guy that I like to watch that has a great video about identity groups and the hierarchy of identity groups. His name is Matt Walsh. I'll try to put the link to his YouTube video on identity groups. It's pretty funny, but it's also reality. And so it's worth taking a watch. It's maybe 8 or 10 minutes long. It's not that long, but it's very, very insightful. Yeah, if you do a search in YouTube, look up Matt, M-A-T-T, Walsh, W-A-L-S-H, identity group hierarchy or pyramid, and that'll get you to where you want to go. You can find that way. Natural rights essentially protect human beings as against the government, against other individuals as well, where insofar as individuals in social contract with other individuals agree that we're going to create a government that has the purpose of protecting our rights and keeping us secure, right? But the rights are listed specifically in the Declaration of Independence and in the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution, so that individuals, members, Americans, can be protected against the government imposing upon them. Social and economic rights, they're essentially not rights at all. They're licenses, where the government says you have the right to have this level of education, whether that's elementary school, high school, or university, which is what they're trying to make it these days, which it doesn't sound like a bad thing, but it just means taking more money from the people that have it so we can pay the bills for the people that don't, which is a good charitable thing to do, not the job of government. Identity groups' rights, they impose some duties upon government to protect them, right, through the courts or through legislation or policy, so that they are not oppressed by individuals, other individuals in society. And so the identity group rights are actually protecting members of the identity groups against other people. That's the defining difference between the identity group rights and natural rights. Natural rights are to keep government from getting into our shorts. Identity group rights are to keep other people from offending us. It's a bit of a problem. And that's the big problem with, well, where society has gotten these days with the idea of identity group rights. Okay, I think that's all we're going to discuss for that at this point, and then we'll pick up the idea, the discussion of the various three tiers, right? Natural rights, social and economic rights, a second tier, and then third tier, identity group rights in our next video. And we'll start to see some of the interplay between these three areas of rights. I'll talk to you guys later.